Hello everybody. Today we're going to be starting the Reading Infinite Jest series, and I plan on having this first video be between pages 1 through 50. And the important part is which edition I'm referring to. So I'm reading the edition that has the foreword by Dave Eggers. This is the spine of that edition. You can see that the front and back have been worn out of my copy because of repeated readings. But we want to start on mine, page 3, which is the year of glad. So you probably think to yourself, well, this is the year of happiness. So let's start. So right above the year of glad, there's an important image that sometimes comes up, and it looks to me like a moon or a circle. And so that's kind of interesting, but unclear to what it means. So where are we? So we have a main character, Harold Incandenza, also known as Hal, and he is sitting next to his uncle, Uncle Charles Tavis, and also next to him is Aubrey DeLint. And so his uncle is his headmaster at the Einfield Tennis Academy. He essentially has spent most of his adult life at. And Aubrey DeLint was also a student of Charles Tavis and went to the Einfield Tennis Academy. So these three are sitting across the table from three deans at the University of Arizona. And these deans are all essentially interviewing Hal to understand if he would be a good fit at the University of Arizona tennis team. And so what is interesting is that throughout this interview, Hal doesn't really talk. You hear him think, we get to read his thoughts, but he's really not talking. His uncle, Charles Tavis, is doing all the talking about how the University of Arizona facilities are so great and how Hal's such a great player, but he's not really supposed to be talking. Hal should be doing the talking, so things are starting off to a weird start. Now, it's clear early on that something's wrong with Hal. At least it's either he's nervous or something else is going on. And he makes this line here, I am debating whether to risk scratching the right side of my jaw. So I'm sure all of us have been in a really nerve-wracking situation where we really overanalyze every single detail, and we would ask ourselves something like this, can I risk scratching my jaw? But it doesn't seem to be a case of nerves that Hal is dealing with. It seems to be just he doesn't want to risk the movement or the biological function that it requires to scratch himself. And then he also is kind of unclear of his emotional status at any given point. On page 5 it says, I compose what I project will be seen as a smile. So all of us can imagine smiling and think, hey, we're smiling, people see us smile. But Hal doesn't really have that capacity. So it's clear that there's some kind of interruption between Hal's brain, which we know is fine here, and his ability to actually talk or express himself. So then we go on to see that essentially there are some peculiarities in Hal's academic record. So we know that Hal, for the majority of his time in school, was a good student. However, in the past year, they said that his grades really cratered. And, Hal does appreciate that the last year has been hard on him because he says that the last year has been really a rough spot. And so it's interesting for the deans because they want to know why this guy has had such bad grades in the last year. And it's a little bit incongruous with the fact that they asked for a very simple entrance essay, which was essentially, what was your favorite academic experience? And instead he sends in a lot of, I think, 8 essays about prescriptive grammar and just all over the place, eclectic styles, eclectic topics, just very bizarre. So the deans are very curious as to what's really going on here. And keep in mind, Hal's uncle is the headmaster of the school. So they're worried that there's some kind of nepotism going on, that they messed with his application material. And so essentially the deans get sick of Uncle Tavis. And so they tell Uncle Tavis and Aubrey DeLint, you need to get out of here. And we want to talk to Hal himself. And so they do. They get to talk to Hal himself, and they essentially are, excited to hear that this guy has a voice box. And he then starts to talk. And what he says is, I am not just a jock. I cannot make myself understood now. Call it something I ate. So this is what he's saying to the deans. And then we have a flashback. So we have Hal talking for the first time ever, and then this flashback. And this flashback is when he was 5 years old. And his mom, who he refers to as Moms, and his brother Oren, his older brother, are in the backyard, and Oren's essentially picking up rocks in the backyard while his mom is tilling the garden, essentially. And Hal comes out, and he's holding in his hand this piece of mold that he had found in the basement. And he holds it up to his mom's face, and he's crying. And the mom is just completely shocked when she hears that he ate it. And this mold that is described as being darkly green, has this orange and red and yellow parasitic funguses, and it's clear that Hal ate it. And then afterwards, his mom is saying, God help my son ate this, and basically screaming it to the neighborhood, it sounds like. But essentially, that's where the flashback ends. So we go into the flashback saying, I cannot express myself, call it something I ate. And then we see a flashback that Hal ate this mold. So we as readers are supposed to, I guess, assume that this mold he ate when he was 5 had some impact all the way up until he was, 18, applying for college. So it's just very bizarre. And so we go back to Hal is talking to the deans. Keep in mind, he's just said basically that he can't express himself. And the deans are just completely shocked. And they can't believe what just happened to them. And then Hal says, please don't think I don't care. And all of a sudden, the deans are getting up, they're pinning him to the floor, shoving him down. People are screaming, people are getting help. And when I first read it, I said to myself, what is going on? Did I miss a line here? What happened? And essentially it went from Hal talking to Hal being pinned to the ground. And so it's clear that something happened. And what did happen, from what the deans described, is that he was making sub-mammalian noises. So take that for what you will. Some people said it was like watching a stick of butter be hit by a mallet. So, it's just not clear what is actually happening, but it's not well received, to say the least. So not only can Hal essentially not talk, but also he can't control his own motor function, because they describe his waggling arms. So he's just basically just out of control when he does anything. When he was sitting at rest, he's fine, but when he needs to do something, he can't do it. And so then essentially they're calling for help. The deans are talking to Uncle Tavis, saying, why did you bring this basket case here? He wasn't fit for university play. And so Tavis is trying to be a good protector of Hal and saying he's just excitable. I told you he was shy, but you didn't listen, and he can get like this if the conditions aren't right. But the deans aren't having any of it. They say that this is out of line. And so eventually ambulance that's going to head to a psychiatric ward or a psychiatric hospital is coming to pick up Hal. And Hal kind of knows what's going on. He doesn't really respond much to this situation. How I interpret it is that it's either happened before or he just is a neutral guy. And then essentially Hal goes to the psychiatric ward, but he is expecting to come back and play in the tennis tournament that's occurring at the University of Arizona the next day. And what's interesting is that he describes who he's going to be playing tomorrow. And who he's going to be playing tomorrow is a young boy named Dimphna. Now, Dimphna is actually a saint, Saint Dimphna. And this saint was patronage of mental illness, neurological diseases. So that kind of fits Hal, because he obviously can't function correctly, and it seems to be neurological in origin. And it's also the patronage of incest, of depression and anxiety. Keep in mind, I'm getting these readouts from Wikipedia, so I don't know how valid that is. But it is clear that this Dimphna character is a bit of a meaningful name here. So one of the things that is occurring at the very end of this first chapter is a character dump. And so this is the list of characters that are occurring in Hal's mind as he's being swept away to the psychiatric ward. He says at the bottom of page 16, I think very briefly of the late Cosgrove Watt. Unclear who it is. I think of the hypophalangeal grief therapist. Not clear who it is. I think of the moms, so his mom. So we know who that is. Though it's not that surprising he would be thinking of the moms. She is the third. She is the third person he thought of. So whatever. But then he thinks of himself's umbrella and an event he remembers from himself. Himself is his dad. So we'll get there. But as of right now, we don't know anything about him. And then he thinks of John N.R. Wayne. So John Wayne. No relation to the John Wayne that played in a bunch of old westerns, but he has this very strange thought about him that has no context in this chapter, which is, I think of John Wayne standing watch in a mask as Donald Gately and I dig up my father's head. So we don't know who Donald Gately is, and we don't know who John Wayne is, but apparently these three, John Wayne, Don Gately, and Hal, conspired to dig up Hal's father's head. We don't have the context for what's happening here, but it's very strange. So there's a lot of really good stuff occurring in this chapter. One of the things I like is there's a couple of things that are just very out there and very, very easy to pass up, but I don't want us to pass them up. One of the things he says he sees when he gets to the psychiatric ward is these chairs were molded orange plastic. And I really like that because it seems to me that he's conjuring up the memory of that flashback where he sees that mold with the orange parasites. He's talking about molded orange plastic, right? So it's a bit of a play on words. He also talks about him becoming an infantophile, which is essentially a pedophile. It's unclear why that is coming up here. It makes more sense to me that he would realize he's becoming an infant because he has really no control over his body, but he says he's becoming an infantophile. So unclear what that means. And the last thing I want to say, so that we don't pass it up, is that he also sees up in the sky as the psychiatric ambulance is coming to take him, an Ultra Mach fighter, too high overhead to hear slices the sky from south to north. Sorry, I kind of butchered that, but I was reading in the middle of a sentence. And then he goes on to say that this Mach fighter is flying from south to north. So if he's in Arizona, it's coming out from, well, either southern Arizona or Mexico up to the United States or Canada. So we just have a lot of really important details that are so easy to pass up for the reader when they really are missing, not trying to miss, but just there's too much to get through in this first chapter. But I want us to remember these parts I bring up. Okay, so we'll next start page 17.